So, ladies and gentlemen, what are we going to talk about today? Well, today we're going to talk about how I learned the language, specifically Swedish language. And for those of you who perhaps have missed my previous announcement, my previous video, you can find it in my YouTube channel, or I'll share the link down below. I gave you all a little bit an announcement about the new series that I'm gonna launch on this channel, and just overall the perspectives and the future, how it looks like here. And I think it's a good time, a good place to continue this series for now. And I'll definitely get back to the philosophical questions next week or in the upcoming weeks, or basically whenever I feel like doing it, because ultimately this is my channel, so I kind of decide what I want to do. So you just gotta wait and see for what is to come next, basically. But no, I don't want to be too rude or too angry or anything of that sort. But I think right now is the perfect time to continue with that. And today we're going to talk about how I learned the language and how I apply certain methods and rules or certain strategies, certain ideas, how to learn the language quicker. And I also want to give you a little bit of a background with some of the language that I learned in the past that didn't really work out and why it didn't work out, and also give you a little insight on how certain schools, or basically how many schools, teach young kids or adults in the later years, how they teach them certain languages. And so before I actually want to give you the insights of how I learned Swedish now in the present time, I want to kind of go back a little bit to the past and explain to you how I was taught French, for example, in schools. And so I learned French for about 12 years. And you can imagine when you learn a language for 12 damn years, I'm pretty sure you would imagine that I would be speaking fluently and I would be completely free and confident in that language. And well, I think you're highly mistaken, because I cannot speak French really that well. I think the max I can pull off is maybe a B1 or a B2. And why is that actually? Now on a serious note, why can I not speak French that well? Well, there are a few reasons. I think one is primarily motivation. I was never interested in French, and that is on my part. It's got nothing to do with school or the teachers or whatsoever. I just didn't like the language. That's it. As simple as that. And I think it's also perhaps the idea of learning French just because you have to learn French is not really motivating for me. And even though it is a national language or a governmental language, so to speak, but still, I personally don't need to use it on a daily basis. And if I do have to use it, then it's very minimal. And even so, we would probably transition over to English or try to speak it in German or any other language, but not French, basically. And the same thing for the French people here in Switzerland, who basically also don't learn German. They also try to be very minimalistic with German, and if they have to ever communicate with the Germans, then they try to go over to English, and that is usually the case. And I've had that many times in my life, and in all kinds of events and all kinds of meetings. We always would transition to English, basically. And I kind of feel like there is no purpose or no meaning to learn French or German if English is going to be the last resort, so to speak, for both sides of nationalities. But going back to the reasonings why my French is not good. So motivation is the first one, and the second one is also the way we were taught French. Now, how were we taught French? Most of the time in school, we used to just get a lot of papers with vocabulary, and they would tell us, well, you have to memorize and learn all the vocabularies and words and all these things, blah 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 blah. Great, you can memorize some of the words, but most of it after you write the test, because we would always have a test that we have to write, of course, because everything has to be tested these days, right? So every time we would have like a vocabulary test, we'd write the test and we would finish the test, we would get our grades, and right the moment we get the test back, or whenever the semester or the school year is finished, we would forget all the words, or not all the words, but we would forget most of the words, and then we have to remember them again or relearn it again. And that used to be the case for many years, like that. We have so many vocabulary tests, We never really had so many speaking exercises. We never had so many reading exercises. It was only purely grammar and vocab. And especially grammar was such a huge emphasis on that. They used to always push us for the grammar skills, meaning that we always had to learn already immediately without having a fundamental basis for French. We had to already know the grammar rules, the subjunctive, and the endings of the verb conjugations, etc., etc. That wasn't really inspiring or motivating or any of that sort. And when you learn a language, I personally don't believe that this is the right approach for me or for many other people. And I saw that in many other people's eyes that wasn't really the way to learn or to make a language learning process so fun. And that was not just in the beginning of my French learning career or phase or process. That was also later on when I was finishing the B2 diploma in French, the Diplôme Français Professionnel, or whatever it's called, the DFP in B2. Basically, it's business French. And guess what? I haven't been using business French in over 2 years now, and I don't need it, and I don't want to really go back to that. And if I really have to learn French, well, then I'm going to have to carry myself to learn it, because I'm not just going to find one day motivation like this and be like, oh, okay, sure, I'll learn French. Yeah, yudi hui. You have to really want to do it. And that's, I think, the biggest part in learning a language is your own will. And if you want to go now to how I personally learn Swedish now, or basically any language, I can probably advise a little bit on that. I'm not gonna lecture you on how to learn a language in that particular way, but I can only share my own personal experience with you. But I hope I can also give you a little bit some advice for those of you who are learning or want to learn a new language. So the first thing that you want to do when learning a new language is finding your own motivation, finding your own purpose. Why do you want to learn the language? What is your goal behind it? Is it to live in that country? Is it to study in that country? Is it just to learn a language for fun? I think that's even better, probably, because you have way more motivation than just, having to study there or having to work or whatever. Is it for something else, for your, speaking with your relatives maybe, or your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever? So these kind of things you have to think about. Why are you learning this language in the first place? And the second part after that is to simply start having fun learning certain words, learning phrases immediately on the get-go. And I also noticed a lot of people first start with Duolingo. Now, what is my view on Duolingo? My view on Duolingo is kind of twofolded, I would say. So the first part, or the first view on Duolingo is that I believe Duolingo is a very good jumpstart for learning a new language. So meaning that it introduces a lot of new words, a lot of fundamental basic words like mom, dad, hi, how are you? I went to the shop, I went to the store, whatever. These kind of sentences are good to know in the beginning, or it kind of, you kind of become immersed in this language. And this is a very good app to get immersed into the language that you're learning. But then later on, it becomes kind of repetitive, it becomes useless. And by useless, I mean that the sentences are useless in it of itself. So in the end, you have like the bear is going to dig a mine or something like that. And you're just not going to use those kind of silly phrases in the end in public, So I think on a whole scale, Duolingo is very good to give you like a boost in like maybe the first 2-3 months. But then after that, you're not going to use it anymore, or it's not going to be applicable to real life situations. And that's when you really have to jump out of that boat and to find other materials that would suit you best. Because I personally used Duolingo for about 2-3 months consistently for about almost 70 days. And after that, I really kind of decided that it wasn't the right thing for me anymore, because the words were just too repetitive. And a lot of times when you have to swipe or choose certain words and form sentences and stuff like that, you always kind of have the same sentences for like 2-3 courses in a row, and it becomes very monotone and very utterly repetitive, boring, and you just don't want to do that really. But like I said, it's definitely good in the beginning. Furthermore, after you kind of get out of this Duolingo phase, you really want to get into material books and you want to really get into listening a lot of podcasts, listening a lot of TV shows, radios, whatever you can listen to basically in that particular language. Also reading is very important. Reading, just simply read. You don't have to care about if you understand everything or not. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is that they worry a lot that they're gonna make mistakes and that they're gonna not understand everything. Well, I don't understand everything either right now in Swedish, and at the same time I'm still reading C2 articles and whatever complex articles that you can find possibly on the internet, and you will eventually learn or pick up some of the words in those articles or books or whatever newspapers. But at the same time, I don't make a big fuss out of it just simply because I don't understand. And I certainly believe that being confident in learning that language is probably the most important part, and also not being afraid to make mistakes in that language. And also going back, or kind of retracting back to the school era, the biggest mistake that the schools could ever make is to punish you for mistakes in learning a language. So every time there was like a grammar test, or you would say a sentence to the teacher, and she would obviously, well, granted she's a teacher and she has the right to correct you, and it's important to be corrected, but it was kind of at some point it kind of became like you had to walk on eggshells to really speak to the teacher, because oftentimes the teachers would really listen to your sentence or just simply listen to you and pick out the smallest, tiniest mistakes that you could ever possibly make, and then they would punish you, ground you, and tell you to do it like that, the way they wanted to do it. And in some cases, I do see the point, and I do see validity in that, but at the same time, I also believe that kind of or demotivates the children or any students to not learn or to not want to learn that language. And I believe when you're learning a language, do not even care about making a bunch of mistakes in the beginning and even later on in life, but also at the same time, remember to memorize the corrections and memorize the things that you have said that aren't really true or correct or any of that sort. And the same thing applies for listening, actually. And I think listening is just as important as reading. And by listening, you can simply listen to podcasts, you can listen to TV shows and to interviews, whatever. Just Google it, search up anything in that particular language and just listen. And a lot of people might be a little bit afraid of that as well in the beginning, that they won't understand anything, or maybe the people are speaking too fast or not clear, or maybe the dialect is a bit different and then you're confused again, et cetera, et cetera. And I personally believe that it doesn't matter again. I personally believe that you just have to listen in order to get a feel for that language and to understand how they even speak. Just simply listening to their intonations, listening to their pronunciations, the way they talk, the way they change certain things, and so on and so forth. And I believe that is just as important as reading or trying to speak with people in that particular language that you're learning. And I personally, what I can tell you is that I listen to podcasts about 1 to 2 hours a day, just to listen, just to get the feel for it. And of course, with time, you actually do start to understand more and more. And I can personally prove that, and I can definitely tell you, and I can confirm that I began listening to podcasts in that language, in Swedish, around, I would say, about April or so. And I've been listening now for a good solid 3 months, and I can definitely understand around 40%. I would say definitely less than 50%, but definitely more than 10%, I would say. And it definitely comes with time. All you need to do is just remain consistent. And even on the days where you have no motivation, and believe me that you will have a lot of days where you're not going to feel motivated at all, you are going to have to continue to remain disciplined and continue learning the language. And I really hope for people like you, hopefully, who are wanting to learn a language or are in the process of selecting a language to learn, that you should not be afraid to make any mistakes, that you should just listen to all kinds of possible audios, so podcasts and TV shows, series, movies with subtitles, hopefully. reading a lot of books, reading a lot of articles, newspapers. On the internet, simply you can read anything on the internet these days. It's not very difficult to find it. And of course, if you have someone that you can speak to in that language, that is even better. I unfortunately don't have any Swedish friends or any Swedish, colleagues at work whatsoever, so it's a little bit difficult for me to communicate in that language, but I do repeat a lot of phrases to myself or just to other people for fun, and tell them, hey, this is that sentence in Swedish, or this is how you say in Swedish, etc., etc. So I kind of put the Swedish language into use in my daily life somehow, but obviously not as much as if I had a friend or someone from Sweden that I knew. So that is kind of the unfortunate part for me, but I hope that you have someone who speaks the language that you want to learn ultimately. So yeah, let me know how you personally learned the language. I'm really curious to hear from you guys how you are doing with your language learning process, and I will be making further videos on Swedish. Probably the next video will be something philosophical, and probably the video after that I'll probably make again something about Swedish, but for that I have to think a little bit and see what I could do with the Swedish content, but probably something about the history or the language or the history language of that sort. So all right, that wraps up the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to share that video with your colleagues and friends, like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good one.